The mind is an excellent servant, but a terrible master. Robin Sharma. Has this phrase ever made you stop and think? From the moment we wake up, there's a voice inside us that never shuts up. It criticizes, plans, judges, praises, reminds. It's as if we were accompanied by a constant narrator who insists on interpreting every detail of our lives. Now stop for a moment and think, do you have any idea how many thoughts go through your head every day? Neuroscientists estimate that we have around 60,000 thoughts a day. But here's the scary thing. More than 80% of them are repetitive and negative. And do you know what that means? Often it's not the outside world that holds us back. It's ourselves. It's ourselves. That voice that reminds you of what went wrong, projects fears about the future, or tells you that you should have done more, never stops. It's like a radio that plays without interruption. But is it helping you, or is it actually sabotaging you? Now tell me, if you're the one thinking, then who's listening? Who is watching all these thoughts as they pass through your mind? This internal dialogue is so present that we don't even question it. And we think that everyone thinks the same way. But here's something surprising. Not everyone has this constant voice. Research shows that some people don't think in words, but in images, sensations, or even abstractions. These differences are not only intriguing, they say a lot about how we perceive the world, how we relate to our fears, and how we make decisions. And there's something even deeper. That voice, which seems so familiar, often doesn't reflect who you are. It's like an echo of past experiences, of beliefs you never chose, and of fears that may not even be yours. Have you noticed how, in moments of doubt or anxiety, it amplifies your fears and diminishes your achievements? But what if I told you that you didn't have to believe everything it said? Now imagine, what would you do with the freedom not to be controlled by that voice? What if, instead of this constant noise, you found clarity, peace, and purpose? Have you ever found yourself talking to yourself? That voice that silently comments on your choices, relives situations from the past, or tries to predict the future? It seems so natural that we rarely question it. But what if I told you that this voice is much more complex and powerful than you think? In psychology, we call this internal conversation internal verbal thought. It's like a personal narrator, always present, helping us to plan, solve problems, and even build our identity. Sounds essential, doesn't it? But there's an important detail. This voice can be both an ally and a saboteur. Now, think about that moment when you failed at something important, perhaps a presentation at work, a disagreement with someone, or even a goal you failed to achieve. What did your inner voice say to you at that time? Something like, "I knew this was going to go wrong. Why didn't you prepare yourself better? Everyone now knows you're not good enough." This kind of dialogue not only discourages us, it shapes how we see the world, and even more so, how we see ourselves. It's as if we have a distorted mental mirror, which amplifies our fears and diminishes our achievements. But where does this voice come from? Psychologist Lev Vygotsky suggested that internal dialogue begins as something external. When we are children, our thoughts are verbalized. Literally, we think out loud. Gradually, as we grow up, we learn to internalize this conversation. It stops being spoken and becomes mental. It's almost like a reflex conditioned by the experiences we've had. Now imagine a child who has grown up listening to constant criticism. As they mature, these external words end up becoming their internal voice. What used to come from outside is now deeply rooted in the mind, repeating the same messages like an echo that never goes away. But is this voice really yours? Or is it just a reflection of what you've heard and believed throughout your life? Neuroscience has an interesting explanation for this. Our brains are essentially programmed to focus on the negative. This mechanism was useful for our ancestors, who needed to be aware of threats in order to survive. But in the modern world, where we no longer face predators, this same mechanism turns on ourselves. It turns small mistakes into big failures, projects scenarios of fear, and keeps our insecurities always lurking. That's why our inner voice often sounds more like a ruthless critic than a friend. In moments of doubt or anxiety, it can trap us in a cycle of self-sabotage, reliving past mistakes and imagining future problems. But here's something curious. Does everyone experience the same kind of internal dialogue? Is this voice, so familiar to you, universal? Research conducted by psychologist Russell Hurlburt revealed something surprising. He used a method called descriptive experience sampling. in which participants wrote down what they were thinking at random times of the day. What he discovered was fascinating. Not everyone has this constant internal monologue. While some people reported frequent verbal thoughts, others described their minds as full of abstract images, sensations, or feelings. And for some, internal dialogue was almost non-existent, a state of mental silence that seems unimaginable to those used to a noisy mind. These findings lead us to question, if not everyone thinks in the same way, what does this mean for how we perceive the world and make decisions? Does the way we think directly influence the way we live? Perhaps the answer is closer than it seems, because deep down, the voice you hear may not be as universal as you think, nor as true to reality as it seems. Is this content making you reflect and sparking new ways of thinking? If so, click the Super Thanks button just below the video. It's a way to say thank you and help me bring more content like this to those who need to reflect on life. Imagine that your mind is like a movie screen. For some people, thoughts appear as clear dialogues, as if they were a narrated movie. For others, they appear as flashes of images, like a photo album that passes quickly by. And some describe thoughts as sensations, almost like vibrations that can't be put into words. Sounds strange, doesn't it? After all, we grew up believing that everyone thinks the same way, that the inner voice, that constant narrative that accompanies us, is a universal experience. But here's the truth, it's not. Recent studies have challenged the idea that everyone experiences thought in the same way. While some describe their mind as a constant monologue, others report something very different. Thoughts that come in flashes of images, physical sensations or emotions that cannot be translated into words. This discovery leads us to a fascinating question. Could it be that the way we think is influenced by factors we don't even realize? For example, creative people often report that their ideas emerge as visual insights, almost like pieces of a puzzle that suddenly come together. More analytical individuals tend to structure their thoughts verbally, as if they were arguing with themselves. And there are those who report something even more unexpected, mental silence. For them, thought is not an internal conversation, but a state of knowing or feeling things without having to articulate them. It seems impossible for those with a noisy mind, but for these people, it's normal. This diversity of experiences reveals something profound. Thinking is not a single rule. And perhaps, by trying to understand how your mind works, you are beginning to discover who you really are. Now, think about it. What would you do with a silent mind? Could you live without that inner voice that seems to guide you or criticize you all the time? These findings not only challenge the idea that thinking is the same for everyone, but also reveal how our perception of the world is directly linked to the way our mind works. For example, if you're someone who thinks mainly in words, you may feel that you need to verbalize everything in order to make sense of things. Someone who thinks in images, on the other hand, can solve problems by visualizing scenarios. And for those who live in mental silence, the focus can be on just feeling. None of these ways are better or worse. They are just reflections of the diversity of the human mind. This diversity brings us to another important point: the role of culture, language, and experiences in shaping our thinking. Studies show that bilingual people often switch the language of their inner voice depending on the context they are in. This means that even the language we speak influences the way we think. In addition, the environment in which we grow up also plays a crucial role. A person who has been encouraged to talk about their feelings may have a more verbal and reflective inner voice. On the other hand, someone who lived in an environment where emotions were not discussed may have more abstract or non-symbolic thoughts. And this leads us to reflect. Does the way we think bring us closer to or distance us from who we really are? In today's world, where we are bombarded with information, opinions, and comparisons, these differences become even more evident. Take social media, for example. For someone with a critical internal dialogue, a simple photo can trigger a spiral of self-criticism. Why am I not like this? What's wrong with me? For those who think in images, the same situation can trigger visual sensations or memories. But here's something that few realize. The way we think not only affects our view of the world, it also shapes the way we relate to our fears, our decisions, and even our purpose. So, I ask you, how do you think your mind works? Have you ever stopped to observe whether you think in words, images, or something completely different? If the way we think varies so much, what does that mean for the way we deal with our challenges? And, more importantly, how can internal dialogue become a powerful tool or a dangerous trap? Imagine you're about to face something important, a presentation at work, a difficult conversation, or even a life-changing decision. The voice inside your head starts, "What if you make a mistake? Everyone will realize you're not ready. Better to give up while there's still time." How many times has this voice paralyzed you? How many opportunities have you passed up because it seemed so convincing? Internal dialogue can be a powerful tool, capable of helping us plan, reflect, and solve problems. But it can also be our greatest saboteur. And the most curious thing, we often don't even realize how much it influences us. In psychology, critical internal dialogue is often associated with conditions such as anxiety and depression. Studies show that people who identify excessively with this voice tend to ruminate, mentally reliving the same mistakes, fears, or insecurities as if they were a broken record. This not only fuels self-criticism, but also distorts reality, turning small problems into major catastrophes. Now think, have you ever experienced a time when you suffered more from what you imagined than from reality itself? This is because, for the brain, there isn't much difference between what you think and what you actually experience. When the inner voice projects fears or failures, the body reacts as if it were already happening. A common example is the famous stage fright. Even before you get up there, your mind starts narrating. You'll stutter, everyone will laugh. It can't possibly work. The result? Your body goes into a state of alert, sweaty hands, rapid heartbeat, muscle tension. All this for something that hasn't even happened yet. But here's the interesting thing. Internal dialogue can also be trained to be your greatest ally. In studies on resilience, researchers have found that people who practice a positive internal dialogue are able to face challenges with more clarity and confidence. Instead of saying, "I'll never make it," they rephrase it to something like, "I'm prepared. If something goes wrong, I'll learn from it." The Greek philosopher Epictetus said, "It is not things that disturb us, but what we think about them." This idea connects directly to the impact of internal dialogue. It's not the event itself that defines you. It's the story you tell yourself about what happened. And that story is more powerful than we realize. Research shows that our brains create neural connections based on the repetition of thoughts. The more you feed a narrative, the stronger it becomes. This means that if you constantly criticize yourself or put yourself down, that will be your mental reality. But in the same way, you can train your mind to create narratives that empower you. Here's something practical you can do. The next time your inner voice starts criticizing, ask yourself, is this really true? Or is it just my mind creating a scenario that doesn't exist? This simple pause can break the cycle of negative thoughts and make room for a more balanced view. Finally, remember, that voice is not who you are. It's a reflection of what you've learned, the experiences you've had, and the beliefs you've acquired. You have the power to rewrite this narrative, transforming your internal dialogue from a ruthless critic to a wise counselor. But how do you transform this voice? How do you silence your inner critic and build a healthy relationship with your mind? If the voice inside your head had the power to shape your reality, what would you do with it? This thought may seem exaggerated, but the truth is that internal dialogue already does this on a daily basis. It not only influences your emotions and decisions, but also defines the way you see the world and yourself. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche said, "He who has a reason for living can endure almost any how, but finding that why requires the mind to be aligned with you, not against you." This is where the process of transformation begins, learning to silence the inner critic and take control of the narrative. But how do you do that? The first step is to observe. Stop for a moment and pay attention to the thoughts going through your mind right now. Don't try to change them or fight them. Just observe. It's like watching a cloud in the sky. When you watch, you realize something essential. You are not the voice. You are the one who hears it. This practice of separating yourself from your thoughts is widely explored in meditation and mindfulness. Buddhism, for example, teaches that suffering arises from attachment, even to internal dialogue. The idea is not to silence the mind, but to learn not to react to it. Imagine this. You're in traffic, late for an important appointment. Your mind starts narrating, "This is a disaster. You should have left earlier. How do you always do that? At this point, you have two options. Identify with these thoughts and increase your anxiety, or observe the voice and let it pass. It's as if you were in the eye of a hurricane. In the center, there is calm and control. But if you're carried away by the winds, everything becomes chaos. Another powerful step is to question the voice. When it says something like, "You're not good enough," ask, "Is that really true? What is the evidence for this?" Often, we'll realize that this voice has no real basis. It's just a reflection of old beliefs, stories we've learned to tell ourselves. Psychologist Carl Jung said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it destiny. This internal dialogue is often the unconscious speaking. Making it conscious is the first step towards regaining control. But what if, instead of fighting this voice, you turned it into an ally? A simple but powerful technique is to rephrase what it says. If your mind says, "You can't do it," try replying, "I haven't done it yet, but I can try." This small change not only reduces the negative impact, but also makes room for self-confidence. Another practical tool is gratitude. Studies show that when we focus on the positive aspects of our lives, the critical internal dialogue loses strength. Try listing 3 things you are grateful for at the end of the day. This helps reprogram your mind to look for what's working, rather than amplifying what's gone wrong. Finally, remember, mental silence is not the absence of thoughts, but the freedom not to be controlled by them. It's like listening to a narrator in the background, but knowing that you're the one driving the story. Did you realize that? Throughout this video, we've explored something that seems so simple, but which defines a large part of our lives. The voice in our head. It's so constant that we confuse ourselves with it, believing that we are what we think we are. But now you know, that voice is not you. It's a reflection of beliefs, fears, and past experiences. It's a program running in the background, trying to protect you, but often limiting you. So who are you really? You are the observer. You're the one who hears the voice, but doesn't have to react to it. You are the space where thoughts arise, where silence happens, where true freedom lives. When you stop identifying with this voice, something incredible happens. The weight of the stories it tells begins to disappear. The insecurities it amplifies lose their strength. And in place of all this, something much deeper emerges. Clarity, peace, purpose. The philosopher Alan Watts said, "You are the universe experiencing itself." A brief moment of self-awareness. This means that you are much more than the narratives of your mind. You are the infinite space where these narratives take place. So from now on, the next time your mind starts criticizing, comparing, or projecting fears, just stop. Take a deep breath. Observe. Ask, is that voice me, or just a story I've learned to tell? Because the real power is not in silencing the voice, it's in choosing how to respond to it. And remember, knowledge is the path to true freedom. Count on me and follow the white rabbit.